Live now.
Is anyone else on?
Not yet, no.
Okay. But was there anything that, not so much the literal, but where you kind of see that we've kind of created a theater of our lives? And somehow we're in hanging out with each other in our own ways, even though the individual is going through some things. The everydayness is what we share. As if we've normalized it, But in fact, the theater is also happening. And it's a theater of relationships and a theater of health and a theater of, so somehow the interaction between us allows one to see, not be limited by time, but to see more the life being lived as a theater piece. And so it's remarkable, the normalness of it, where then one's kids who are now grown come visit and people see and they're interacting and you see the theater that you've experienced over all these years, the normalization of it, and those folks going on and having their lives. And some finding a way to break up, and this one did this and that one did this, or whatever the story, but finding a way to go do their thing. But then you also find in retrospect that there was an immersive sense that happened.
Yeah.
And it's, are we on now?
Yes.
Yeah. Is anyone else on it?
Jimmy is here. No one else has said hi.
So let's say in retrospect, you see almost as if you've graduated from school, so that still is with you no matter what your age or circumstance. That education somehow has inveigled its way into your life where you think a certain way. So let's say there is a moment where you visit your life, not only your life as a possessive, but your life as a creative act, where you know the ins and outs of it, what went into it, how it happened, this and so you see a parallel lives of your own existence that in relationship with you, others find out or explore also or experience their own version, where there's an entwining of people's histories, but there's a feeling that allows it.
Yeah.
When the feeling is lost, then those separate experiences separate. When the feeling is there, that somehow what would have been separate feelings can, and it may even be like you're walking down the street and see someone, and but then there may be a glance where there's a shared humanity or a shared feeling or a joke or something to a stranger. And so there's a shared humanness in the moment, or we'll call it humanness because the eye connection took away the separation in one sense. There was a shared moment. And it wasn't literal or anything like that. So you start to see other conversations going on in the life. Hello, Urja.
Hello, Danny.
How are you? So when one sees not only the literalness of their life, but you're also seeing the temporariness, the other dimensions of it, the interaction, somehow the you in you is shifted from a karma, not only literal time, but somehow your presence is an interactive, in absence and in presence, even the memory of you as a conversation that the person couldn't have had with themselves. But somehow the memory of you allows you an argument that they can have with themselves or an exploration or something like that. So you see that you discover many versions of you that is not you, but it's some version of you, some interpretation of you, some perspective that happened around an interaction with you. And you meet that you in absentia, in time, years later, in some letter, okay, and you see, you stumble into a parallel dimension that somehow you intuited was always there, but it needs a kind of genuine accidental moment for it to be created, because the ego somehow would seize upon it and literalize it again as a possessive, when it then comes into a point where this part of its life is no longer around the literalness, it's around the kind of shedding light on by presence, by interaction. And it's not limited to a Freudian light or psychological light or like that, but it has more of a creative dimension to it, where there's an aha moment where the person sees that they have been in a creative process in this life all along. While they literalized it or possessed it and owned it, then you see in retrospect that you literalize it in order to have the depth of the experience. You see that to some extent, there is a pursuit of the entirety of the experience. And what may be very normal that one should be able to be talked about out of a breaking up of a relationship, you see how close it comes to, in a mindset, to a death experience.
Mm.
And you say, come on, what are you talking about? What the hell's going on? You see, but somehow you see death experience not only being death experience, but death to a dream, death to the energy, death to a feeling. If the feeling leaves, does one come close to death? Is somehow an intuitive feeling, certain feelings breathe into the story from the get-go.
Danny, how would you, oh,
yeah,
how would you compare that to like psychological terms such as codependency and such?
Well, let's say you visit these places. What would it be if is a family codependent? If there's infants and then there's adults and there are other children, they have an interactive going on. Now they may rebel, they may fight, this may happen, okay. But you see, now, can you see inside of that story how many psychological structures will be there? How many things will happen to individuals that they'll hide or suppress or be hurt by? How many times will the parents have to act like they're tough or strong in order to get them to obey, and yet, okay, suffer the... So you see a whole interactive taking place that is hidden in plain sight as normal.
Yeah.
And yet you see it enters into the story for each individual. But as it enters into the story for each individual, the individuals are parting from each other in some way, in order to maintain the status quo. Then they have personal lives that are hidden, dreams, schemes, hopes, things, while they have on the surface a structural situation. So, and if you meet the dreams and the hopes or whatever, accidentally, whatever, it may throw you to find out that your mother has such dreams while she had a family that she was maintaining, or, and then you see the juxtaposition of events. So then you discover a multidimensional existence in one day, in one life, in one experience that exists on many, and the ability to see it on many levels, where seeing is the life. Meaning that you then are no longer, the story is no longer driven by a karma, but something else is engaged, where you enter into the story from a different perspective, where you've entered into this, as we kid around, where the angel enters into the story to have the experience. Where you're coming from then has meaning. Because I feel then when you re-enter the story from that place, then that one thing that is lacking in that experience that's there in the world is pursuit of something. I think that one has a dialogue creatively when one comes to a kind of clarity with one's being. And what does that mean? Even when I'm kidding around where I said that my foot hurt and was so bad and was they didn't know what it was. And then I get a dream where my foot says, you know what it is, you've been neglecting me, and in very dopey terms, like as if it was, we were married. And my
Right.
foot, so you've been neglecting me, you haven't been taking baths over me, and now you're going to blame science. Okay. So honest conversation doesn't have to be honest conversation. You see what is missing then in the continuity, and then what is missing in the family that can have with an aunt or a friend or something, but it can't have with the mother or can't have with the father, is a heartfelt conversation. The literalness of the family becomes the primary. That you discover that your family, just people, but a hidden life from you in some way, hidden in plain sight. You discover the mystery and the history. It's not only a psychodrama or whatever, but then you start to see you have access to a situation that is limited unless you were in a state yourself. And that state sees something of its own history that actually had more mystery in it than history. It was hidden in the history. But they were people, and when accidents happen, and they met, and you see all the accidents that constitute you. And you visit your life also, not only as literally with you as a social security number and a date, but you that had no time, that existed before you literally existed. And you saw all the series of so-called accidents that were normalized, but all the accidents that had to happen for people to meet, for this to happen, for that to happen. So you are then privy to almost the science of one's life, where you see parallel energies. You don't see time always as a literal thing, but something that you can almost skateboard down, where you can slide into this place and that place in your life. And so somehow you have access to life being lived in the so-called literalness of day to day, or the survival sense of the literal identity. But then you have access through accidents usually, or stumbling upon. But usually the stumbling upon, again, the accidents are based on a kind of discipline, which I would mean in writing music, whatever, that you then come to a limitation in yourself. And that limitation then becomes the dynamic. It's not a limitation at all, but it's forcing another perspective. But as you have access to another perspective, your claim on the life is no longer the same. Have you have access to a life more as a creative act, then your claim to it as a literalness starts to surrender. And I say, what would that mean? I say, then the ego then turns into more of an Uber driver than the director of the story. Meaning that the Uber driver has a sense of where it's taking you, but doesn't own the experience. Do you understand that to some extent, Darren?
Yeah, I think so. Seems like the Uber driver is, or the one that cries at the movie is the ego. Is that right?
I'm saying let's not literalize it so much. Let's say you have a full. Who would you elect to take you to the movie? You want to drive yourself, or do you want to call someone to drive? Or okay.
Guess I would want to drive myself. Yeah.
So if you drive yourself, then you've also literalized the driver and the goal and the circumstance. But if you then have a driver that you trust, or whatever, the different level, then that allows you to let the driver do the driving, and it allows you creatively. But you also may have a conversation with the driver that is a bit like the alter ego, yeah. So alter ego, meaning that somehow the ego has a way of, it can fracture itself into conversations with itself. So it can create, you say, in a relationship, an alter ego that is like a private conversation when it's having a conversation with this person. Or you could now rent people, right? Or for readings and stuff like that, where you have here, have Ursha be an alter ego. You want to have an alter ego question for Ursha? Ursha, why do my toes hurt in the morning?
Well, it's a process of dying. It's part of the process.
No, don't go that far. It may just be.
Well,
So let's say we are discussing dying and living humorously, challengingly, creatively, but anyway, there is a process that is happening. And the process weaves its way into our everyday life, into our thoughts and our everyday being. So even though we thought we are limited to being this identity who wakes up at this time and does this and earns that and this and that, has these roles, we also start to find out that there are parallel existences within that are not covered by the identity or by the history, but that have elements of mystery running through them. So when you start to discover to some extent that the normal life that one has lived had the mystery running through it throughout the story, that hidden in the everyday with a multi-dimensional situation depending on your perspective. Now, if you're a doctor, you may have a perspective of what the health is in the circumstance and how much time was there and what sort of urgency existed. So let's say if you had disciplines in yourself, you would bring that to the story. But the story itself was not what was happening. The story was a reflection of a happening, of an interaction, of an exchange that would exist in memory, that concrete existence was only an aspect of it. And as you explore the arts in your own life, and as in exploring the arts, it becomes a way of living, where your every day is a way of living. And then you also see in that way of living that accidents happen. It can't be so captured by your plans or your predictions or whatever. It gives you a full range of experience of not knowing what to do and holy shit and this and that. And you see that's exactly what you'll be writing about or singing about or discussing or sharing. But then you also see from a different perspective that somehow one creatively came into the picture to have the experience that they're having. They're not accidental experiences. They are experiences of a creative being trying to figure out literally what everyone wants from you. You understand? So it is not exactly a dumb thing to be, as they felt, a stranger in a strange land where you come from another planet and they celebrate you for your innocence from coming from another planet. But you don't think that way literally because your mind doesn't think in time and space and the past doesn't have a past. So it doesn't have a reference point of the past. It has more of a creative reference point. So it would be more as if incidents that happened to you, you remember through movies. Like similar situations, you saw something happen to you and it resembles a movie that you've experienced or something that you read. And so somehow you've translated an experience into an art form by seeing the similarity in the art form. So in seeing the similarity, you've also introduced a parallel life that is having experiences, not building on the experiences or planning or structuring the experience. Somehow is, and as it's had experience in its life, it's purified them, where they're no longer as goal-oriented. It understands that interferes with the truth of the expression. And I say, why? Because I say, when you include another in your goal, then you have a moment there waiting for you of explosion, not because it's bad, but because somehow this next stage of what you're sharing, everyone who's on board is sharing the experience together now. And so that's, you see, so it's coming from a different place. I say, why? I say, because then their history is not entering into the story as strongly. somehow the so-called falling in love, or hey baby, do you want to try this thing, as dumb as that, allows a space that if you do it, it's you doing it. And meaning that you can't blame the story any longer for the experience. It brought you to this creative point. And it's also in the music or in the writing or whatever you're doing, it brought you to a point where not knowing what to do is because the doer is not such an important aspect of the moment as it is if you had a literal story and you had to get it out on time and this and that. But the doer is only an aspect. You see that your life is somehow experiential. And that what happens when you join with another, it's kind of based on attractions that are not, may not be logical, but they're experiential. And there will be moments in relationship where it will be, hey baby, what the hell are we doing with each other? What's going on here? And then you see when that moment is asked, you see then something that was taken for granted then becomes illuminated. And somehow, to some degree, it was based on not seeing or this or that, that somehow the creative act was based on all other aspects of the self. Even if it was Einstein, if he had a love affair, he would put aside all his knowledge and shtick and everything he knew to simply have the experience of the love affair. Okay. And that somehow that thread, no matter what level or where you are or who you think you are, there is a relationship to the mystery. And if it manifests in a form, the form is revealing a dialogue that is happening. When the feeling is there, I think there's a relationship to the mystery. So what would have been impractical or illogical or this or that seems natural in that feeling. If the feeling shifts, then the eruptions exist in such a way. And they said, is there a case in point? I said, yeah, the virus that she had revealed pneumonia and revealed that she was overweight and revealed other conditions that somehow everybody knew, but was normal. But the virus, when it came, revealed all that, where everyone took for granted or was normal or didn't reflect on or something like that. So did the virus do it, or the virus was the overwhelming feature where these other things then had to surrender. So then you see, holy shit, there's always a parallel dialogue going on. And it's not, and I don't know that life itself is worried about how long it lives or how short it lives or this or that, but it seems to me that the full experience is there. And you have the full experience of the person and losing them in some way that couldn't be had while you were there with them. That it's the loss that revealed, because it's not your loss. It's something that took away the story, pushed the story out of the way, and revealed something that one has been managing. One has been managing relationship and circumstance in their life. And when you get a peep into that management, you see something deeply holy in your own simple existence. The simple existence itself, as you look into it. And it's almost as if you were a surgeon and you look into it and you're touched by how remarkable it is. But even going a bit further than that, is that you have a flash. And the flash gives you a peep. As if you were looking through a periscope. It looks you underwater, you're underwater, but you get a peep of what it looks like out there in a focus thing. And I feel that from that perspective, you re-enter the form. From just a different perspective enters into the story. Now I was also just reading an article about competing eyes. When one has competing eyes, seeing different things or whatever on different levels, and then restoring them to a competition from going, that there's some a condition where the eye is seeing slightly different than the other eye and throws the whole mechanism off. And then throws off digestion and throws off blood circulation and everything like that. With the eyeball, just seeing a split second different or whatever. And but then to the person who that's happening to, it's a whole nother world that's kind of opened up while they're living regularly. They're also seeing this other dimension. But not through a transformative, but because something has happened in the body. Okay. So it's very interesting then to discover that things may be a split second away from happening anyway. One is so subject to what takes a literal existence, in fact, has always been up in the air. What looks like time being a fixed form, in retrospect, you see, has always been up in the air, has always had a creative narrative running through it that you access in time. And you get a chance and you see what really, in your mind's eye, what really happened, not only with thought, what was happening in the time, but from a revelation, it changes your relationship to the history. And then every time you come in contact with the mystery in the history, and what is the mystery in the history is that we've normalized our background, our story, into a normal association when it's really has more elements of holy shit. You know, but it's like normal. I was born there. This is what happened to me. And the literalness becomes the story of you. But you see on reflection, the literalness is not the story of you. There's an echo effect. There's a happening that also runs through the experience. And in experiencing that, there is something sacred that happens in relationship to it. And when I say sacred, it means that somehow the life becomes art. And there's something in the, once you perceive the art of it, there's something in the purity of it. And the purity is not laid out, but people know. Just as if you walked down the street and you saw someone doing something horrendous to other people or something, you would know it's horrendous. It would affect you, touch you. You may run, you may interact, you may interfere, but somehow it would create a mirror reaction or a response in you that may even capture you and take you away from where you're going and what you're doing or whatever, where just survival becomes the atmosphere. So let's say there are dormant existences within the everyday existence. But when there is also something in the life that violates a kind of innate human in yourself, there's usually a screw up or a reaction. So I would like to reflect more like in the retrospect, the screwing up in life, which seemed almost purposeful in retrospect. And you also see it had a creative dimension. Something was being pushed that wasn't truthfully happening. And you also see that in retrospect, there was a pressure to inherently commit to some dialogue, some identity, some structure of continuity that one inwardly perceived was untrue. So then one perceived the challenges of commitment to the literalness of the self and the challenge of being free creatively. So when one had to be free creatively, one was made into a villain, into a rat, into a monster, because somehow the contract was the real thing, not the integrity of the experience. And I'm not making the integrity of the experience a Boy Scout scenario. I'm talking of the artist. And the perception then that much of what is happening in life is in fact, there's an agreement around the dialogue that allows an intimacy of sharing. if something goes wrong with your father or your mother or something like that, the same person you may be sharing a night with or a day with or a week with or whatever, you may start accusing them of, you rat bad, you did this to me and I did. You understand? All of a sudden, some incident happens where it awakens this. So you see, hidden in the story is a story, is a story, is a story, is a story forever. But the soul of the story is hidden in plain sight. When a heartfelt happens, or a challenge happens, the story fades away and there's an instant feeling that's shared. Segue, shall we answer it? Let's see where it is. You must... Hello? Yes. Oh, a manhunt is going out here in a Roy Honda. So highways are blocked.
I saw that when I drove in. It was crazy.
State troopers are riding around and the helicopters are circling the area.
What happening right over where our
And what is going on? A manhunt for what?
I saw that was like a nasty accident.
Just stopping cars? Yeah. They're looking for someone, okay.
There's a nasty accident.
Now put the radio on. Huh?
There was a nasty accident.
Maybe a fatality or a hit and run.
Yeah, I saw a
Or,
car that was like.
oh, you saw it also out there.
Yeah.
So is there something that well, that's really interesting that it comes in the middle of our thing. But is there something you're suggesting? Be careful if you go out. Okay, but you could take a look around. Although the dogs bark over nothing, so I'm sure the dogs would bark over something, wouldn't they?
Yes, it would.
Well, let's see, because they bark over nothing like it's a riot going on. So, okay, I think we'll hang with it. Anybody suggesting anything out there? Well, thanks for that call, Segue. Where are you with? Wow, they have full military gear.
Yeah, it's pretty.
And you're 7 cars back. You're 7 cars back. Are you coming out to the house?
I went the back way.
You were going into town, so they're blocking people from going to town also?
You know, right where we go into the
Yeah.
highway. Right there.
Okay, so keep in touch and let me know if you hear anything further. And Spiro will see what to do. He knows what to do. He'll catch you later then. Okay. Yeah, I think that, we've had this once, a couple of times before when we're not that far from the state prison. So there was a breakout before and they ran in the neighborhood here. They heard about that. And but so far, knock on wood, we're okay. And Spiro again can teach some yoga. Maybe if some folks come here, you can teach them yoga. So we'll see you later. Bye. Oh, no, that's good. That's very good of you. And keep in touch if you know more. Okay, bye. Bye. So that's good. You saw that when you were just coming back. So that's been out there for a while then.
Yeah. I was glad I went the back way to get here. Otherwise, I would have been stopped.
Well, if they have helicopters and all that, it must be
Can you hear them?
not someone robbing the dollar store then, is it? That must be pretty heavy.
I think
Yeah.
there was like piled up cars and someone like split. Ran.
Okay, should we call it a day here, or we were about to take off while we're sitting down?
Mhm.
just by kind of accessing other dimensions in yourself, and then all of a sudden where news of something can shift you into a doing or not doing. Should you be citizens? Should you defend? Should you not defend? So these are the questions that will come philosophically when it's not laid out with rules, but somehow you're keeping the human together. So the human is more apt to say, give the guy a break or this or that, where it's not so dumb. You just see philosophically the thread that runs through it. And then the elements of connectedness and non-connectedness. If it's touched, it shares a life. It shares a moment. If it's not touched, the separation of powers and people are distinctly separate with rules and regulations and who they are. But if there's a feeling of friendship, it cuts through race and style and circumstance, and it shares that, and it may even make a joke of all those other things, which would be against the law in the regular world. But if you have a kidding around friendship where you're hanging around in that way, that become the subject of jokes and kidding around because there was human before it took on the identities. But when the identities are who it is, and it hasn't reached a human. So in the friendship, it touches upon the human, which reconciles most of the issues. Where it's easy to share a meal with a friend that you share a feeling for. And yet that may cut cross generations and years and circumstance and systems that they come from. But somehow the friendship makes foolish all of that if it interferes with the simple feeling. And yet you see historically people who've fallen in love have had to run away because of the religions or the belief systems in their neighborhood or they're around. And in fact, once they were in a neighborhood, the neighborhood knew everything about everyone. And somehow your life then was enveloped into a circumstance of literalness. And if you see that internally you had a relationship with an honest love affair, if it then turned into a dishonest structure, you started to see it falling apart by its own nature. It didn't need anything. That somehow there was a need for something true or pure, and it wasn't that whenever they tried to spell it out, they overreached. It said, look, man, it just had to be true. Like someone would try to, how to convey to you. And you say, but should I wear this? Should I do that? Should I do push-ups? What's the rules? And they say, the truth will laugh at the rules. And it's only in the surrender of the rules to some, but it has to be truthful surrender. You see that the very thing that allowed you to survive is now denying you the dynamic.
Yeah.
And then you see all the elements that run through their life. And you also see, even in show business, how they had to stylize when they needed rent money or they needed money and what they had to appeal to the crowd. But then if they had enough money, they can actually do an artistic venture. So you start to see the threads running through every experience, the creative and the literal. And you see, to some extent, in meeting each other, it then threw us into the creative, or revealed the creative as the normal. So someone can teach voice lessons, someone can do this, someone can sing, and that's their life. They don't have a job or a literal job, but somehow their life is their work. And that's what it meant to creative, that somehow you didn't have to falsify, you can assume identities, but coming from a creative place. And when you were doing that element started to enter into the natural life, even though most of the structures in our society are based on a different framework. Even discovering about sleep situation like that, where it's been organized into an 8-hour form around that literal world, but in creative people, they have very great trouble with that kind of sleep because they have creative time. and their body is adjusting to creative time while they're trying to force the 8-hour day is normal on it. So you say, holy shit, then you just have a peep of something. You see what looks like a struggle relaxes itself to a kind of normalcy. But it's a perceptive normalcy. You've seen, in fact, we'll say the 8-hour sleep that was normalized into a situation created its own crises within the structure. If your daily life was a different kind of life, it didn't have the 9-hour day logical this way or that way, but more it was your creative expression. Then you also saw that the body was not some separate entity from you, but the body and you are moving together, and the body is always adjusting to your moves. It is not some separate entity. And so that's why I'm saying in meeting a partner in that way is to surrender your ownership of the story, and you see that it has been a cooperative. And that when it experiences itself in that way, it takes away most of the structures of existence of survival and motives. When in fact it is perceived as there's a whole body, a whole being experience. And that somehow there is a conversation between the inner and outer that is going on, not only in your own body with breathing out and breathing in, or where you meet your body as a being, as a thou, but having met that, then you have relationships that have thou in it. And in having thou, you've taken away some of the motive that is there in the literal relationship. And I say, what would that be? And I say, you're caring for a child. So the motive shifts into care. You still may be concerned about their future or this or that, but it's still around care. That ingredient is usually missing in the literal life. But that feeling gives you insight that's denied without that feeling, where logic determines. Because that feeling, when it's there, is not dominated by logic.
Yeah.
Okay. When it's a shaky thing, then logic attempts to, but I say no, logic is an aspect of the feeling, doesn't own the story. And I say, why? I say, because then it will make those who have feelings into like they're stupid because they're not doing something logical. But they're doing something intuitive that may include logic, but they're not determined by the logic so much. And that's the fault in one aspect in the literal world, where doing is the measure. But in the world where dreams as life, in the world where imagination as life, is not a confinement to imagination as an escape. It is that you have a full palette of colors available to you. So it's not because you have 5 or 8 colors available to you in your painting, where before you may have only had 1 or so, but you've expanded your range. And in expanding the range, you also see it as giving you insight into things that were hidden. But then it becomes holy. And I again say it's not holy like scared holy, it is holy like something you're caring for. And then you see in the friendships, even when it goes through tough times, why you would be interactive where it doesn't seem logical to someone outside of it. You see, logic isn't the prevailing thing. There's something still, even though it's shifting, there's a memory of something sacred running through the story. Friendship has a sacred element to it. And the thing about that dimension is where it doesn't literally tell you what to do. Because doing is not, it demands that you go through a meditative challenge in yourself, not only figure out what to do. It thinks that the doer is superficial. Going through a process, experiencing a process, not as self-punishment, but self-punishment may come in, try to ruin the story or capture the story. but you see your life itself as a creative act. And when you are going through these challenges, because somehow you're being true to something that's happening, while the form wants to continue, there is a experience necessary where it's not so much coming out of the history or the fear, but somehow there is an honest conversation without it being too literal. It's a heartfelt conversation that seems normal. But hey, baby, are you into this? Where it's no longer, you've had like everything else before that was a kind of practice or rehearsal. And that the next phase of it, we've shifted our life from a history into a mystery. It's no longer a dominating effect. We've released the story from its literalness. But this is a shared space, I feel. Does that make sense then? Now, let us share, let's see, attachment, one image. Shall we see what that looks like now? Do you want to look at that?
What are you talking about then?
We just got a notice that says attachment, one image.
Oh,
So we may be having, if we're seeing too many movies, maybe, but we may be in a movie.
Segue.
I saw this morning that Ukrainians are using Bitcoin for getting
They're
money.
using Dogecoin.
What's that?
They're using Dogecoin.
They're using
accepting-
Doge, they're using Polkadot, they're using all kinds of coins, really.
Well, I use Bitcoin.
Okay, no,
as
you should be
control.
aware of
I
it. What
don't
it
know the
is,
detail.
what it is here, Erja,
Yeah.
Santa Fe police officer and uninvolved civilian have died in a wrong-way crash on I-25 near Santa Fe. It's down the block. Involved in chase for kidnapping, carjacking suspect who drove off is now on the run.
Oh, that's-
Residents asked to stay in home.
Well, that's us.
That's us.
It was really like as you drive in, you drive under the highway, and you could see the crash. It was
What?
right there.
Well, I guess other people have heard that. Is that online? Next door
I'll
neighbors?
look it up. I'll see.
Do you want to tell Marge and that there is tell Naeem and a few others. So that's
Yeah.
okay. But it does seem like it is a dangerous situation. A kidnapper or something like that crashed.
Oh,
And two people died or something. A cop died and a
Wow.
civilian died.
Intense.
And it's not far from here. So if they were running around here,
Yeah, they're on the run.
we've
So
had
somebody
stuff,
who-
we've had that stuff like that before. There are vacant homes
Oh.
and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yes.
the kidnapper and the kidnappee are still in a car?
It's
No.
hard to say, but there was a car going the other direction, swerved over on the highway, hit a car. The car tumbled and killed the people.
Ah.
The tumbled car is there, and the person
The
that
police officer died.
and the person that that made the hit or crashed in, like got out of the car and ran.
Oh, so he's on foot.
Yeah. But
Or
apparently they want him
maybe-
for kidnapping.
Well, hopefully the kidnappee is free then.
Yeah, they didn't mention, did they
I'm
mention
looking it
anything
up
about,
a bit right now.
or may even be on the radio if you,
I looked up on the radio, but I didn't hear anything.
but okay, let's, is everyone okay? Anyone else on that we can't see?
Spiro and Jimmy.
Okay.
Oh, I'm on. I was on.
Well, it seems like the very things that we're kind of describing, we're kind of in it, we're in it, but not of it. And so it's happening now to us as news. Beware, around your neighborhood is this guy who's running away from cops and this and that.
Did
So
you
what
lock
do
your
you think?
doors?
No, I mean, it's like open. There's like people working outside.
We have a dopey house, don't we? That anyone could do.
It's hard to lock it up.
And so it is a kind of, it has been naive, isn't it? But it also was the first night we moved here, 40 something years ago then, okay, that we were all in the living room together while a couple of people were robbing the house,
Well, this is what he
you
said.
know, and
Oh.
you know, and apparently the people who owned the house before us were they were movie makers or something like that. So they had a lot of parties here, and people from the
Oh.
neighborhoods would come in, and so it was very interesting. But they found the credit cards and everything else like that they had thrown away. The cops found them later
Oh
on.
my gosh.
But it was just so we had a burglary, the first thing that happened in our experience in the house. So it was.
So you were in the living room? Where were they? In the
We were
outside
all in the
room?
living room doing yoga in the evening time or something like that, or sharing a moment there, you know, while they were hitting the rooms.
Oh my
But they knew
God.
their place. They knew their way around.
Mm.
So I think they were young people there who were partied with the youngsters who lived here, you know. Or they
Hmm.
found them. I don't know whatever came out of that.
Mm.
I think Segway may have come out of that. Something similar to that. So it's been a strange story, almost operatic in its experiences of normalcy. You know, and but the one thing in the normalcy was that somehow everyone who interacted still experienced a certain inherent nonviolence in their being. Now that may screw them up in their career moves, where you can do as an actor, you can do violence, but in order to be an actor, you can't be violent. You can't let violence capture the art. So you can do violence. But being violence is to lose the art into the literal. And once you literalize the art of it, it starts to collapse around you. Because somehow it was based on a recognition that your entree into the story was now an art form, and somehow it was a privilege, not privilege like you had to hide yourself, but privilege because you then entered into a situation with folks who spoke a different language. And the language included feelings in the life, where most of the logic in the life didn't include feelings in that way. Where the logic of survival superseded that. Well, here's a segue.
I drove under that like
You've survived.
half hour ago.
What happened?
It's a wrong way crash on the highway. Officer involved. It's a carjacking and kidnapping, and they have the
Is there
National Guard out
someone
there.
being kidnapped also?
I don't know. It's just what it said on the news, and but there's a fatality, so the whole highway is blocked off.
Driving under, you could see what
Couldn't
it
e-
was.
Yeah, I saw
I saw the
it.
car.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw it too, but I came here like, I was here
Okay.
before you left. I saw it.
Okay.
I waited there 20 minutes, and they're not letting anybody go through.
Well, Spiro is going to drive to the airport to pick up Mary.
But that's
So we'll bring Mary back in the middle of a carjacking. Let's see.
Oh.
well, it's not, then,
But it seems okay. Does it seem okay here?
I mean,
Or you want to
okay,
take,
they had this street before the ayahuasca church.
should we take precautions?
The street before the ayahuasca church, they had blocked off. There was 4 state troopers right there at the end of that road. And so they let me pass because I was going to the next road. But
Hold
that
on.
road they have blocked off.
Can you put the nutty guy voice aside? I'm asking you a question. I'd like
I
to
think
keep,
we're okay.
I'd like to keep our cool
We're okay.
without being stupid about it. Because we may end up having to help somebody who's hurt or something like that. They're calling a guy a kidnapper. He may be a guy with a broken leg who's running. So let's say what situation we're in. But the one thing is that it has to be nonviolent.
Well, if there's
So that's when we need your voice like that. For maybe 10 minutes, but no more than 10 minutes. No, then I've got some other mantras and stuff that I can whip out.
Involved in chase for kidnapping, carjacking suspect.
Anything clearer? No, sometimes it's happened before where there has been a kind of hint of violence coming your way, and then it's allowed. So then we tried to figure out, do you have any precaution? I said, it would be nice if lights go off or something like that. Or it gives you 5 or 10 minutes to take a drive, or I'll catch you. But it gives you 10 minutes to see what role you want to adopt. Especially if I'm here then with alone with 5 other people who are, and I'm going to possibly have to come out and act like a cowboy, act like this, or do something. So my feeling is you'd like to have 10 or 15 minutes to maybe take a ride or change the situation or whatever, or let them take whatever they want to take, and we'll catch them later. However dopey it may seem, but what you're looking out for is something of the grace, if you can, without it being too stupid. That somehow you understand there's pressures that are going on. The guy who delivers the newspaper has a mattress on his car, on the top of his car and everything. So people may be strung out, living out there. And so it's a phenomenon that's going on that you're in. You have the sense of yourself of being in it, but not of it, because your motives aren't the same.
Right.
And you may be stupid enough to help a hurt person, even though they may be this or that, but just a common feeling or whatever. But you're not, it's not stupid. It's what is naive story. You still have a relationship to the human.
Yeah.
If it literalizes, then it's like that theory again where you cry at the movie or you throw your shoe at the villain. So to cry some at the movie is to be touched by, creatively touched, but then to throw you is to literalize into a possessed, do something, takes over the story. And you see that most of your presence would have more of an effect. The doer, in fact, would start to. And I say, why? I say, because somehow it needs to be invited. An invitation is not laid out, but somehow it has to touch you in a way where your life and the life that you're seeing become one. If you see a kid being hurt and you step into the story, somehow the lives are one life. The identities are shifted to where the need is. So you see remarkable things creatively are happening in the normalcy. And you see we're moving in that kind of atmosphere where we're not so much related to the story or the trips that are going on around us, because we're not playing on humanity that way. So, but then when there's an element that touches you, it allows you entree into the story. So you see that we're in it, but we're not of it. We're in it to the extent that we see the human thread running through it. We're not of it because we're not historically bound to it. You see, when the history takes over, what do you see? Who owns the story? It can allow you to be inhuman. So when your relationship is to the human, then you see the human is there first, then there's the history. If the history presents to be the human, then you see the histories will fight, because each of them will think the history is superior. But for the one who observes, they'll see the mystery running through the history, because they can't get excited enough to kill. They see more the thread that what the people will see in time, after being horrendous with each other, you will see in the moment. There will be discovery in time. That any time humanity is being threatened in some way, it can be a small thing, but when you see the image of it, where a person is treated like a piece of shit, completely like a piece of shit, no feeling for their life or what's going on at all for them, even their breathing or what they're thinking, but just you have the perfect right over the full experience of the person. Then when a small incident may happen where it was normal slavery and everyone took it for granted, but then you see a thing that it's like Jesus said that when he threw over the money changers at the temple, that it was such a sellout. supposedly of the religion. And so there's something that touches you that has an instant reaction, a really instant sense of it creatively. Where somehow it allows you to enter into the story. Feeling.
Mhm.
How's it looking out there? Okay, they're all. Does it seem okay? Okay, everyone seems to be dealing with it then. Okay,
Okay.
we'll let you know what happens. I'll see you tomorrow night,
Okay.
Eric. Okay, and nice really to see you. If
Thanks,
anything
Dave.
comes up, give a call anytime.
Thank
Okay,
you, Danny,
we'll see you.
Thank you.
so much.
Bye bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.